Yeah, so this is the Managed Analytics team. Sat here with Jensen from the growth team, and we're going to be talking about A/B tests and how the growth team are currently using them. So we'll start off, and maybe we could get a quick overview from you, Jensen, as to how you're using A/B tests and what you're learning so far about it in GitLab.
Yeah. So when we talk about A/B tests, there's really two parts, or two kind of distinctly different ways that we run tests as on the acquisition team. One is through LaunchDarkly, which is a A/B test provider, basically, that lets you collect data and does the analysis for you on who won once you get to statistical certainty. That has been super amazing because it's pre-canned and it collects that information for you. You just define what success is. But we only use that on the marketing site because it's not open source and we can't put non-open source tools into the product itself because those then go into the EE product when people spin up a self-hosted instance. So whenever you're hearing about LaunchDarkly, it's just on potentially like on docs or on about.gitlab.com, but not inside the product.
I see. And that's because of the instrumentation that you have to do in order to use LaunchDarkly. You have to send data to LaunchDarkly using LaunchDarkly APIs, and the direction that you've had thus far is keep that out of the code base.
Correct. Yeah. And that's similar to before this. We had a whole kind of kerfuffle around putting Pendo into the product. We put Pendo's data analytics tool. It does a lot of different things. One is surveying, and there's a few other things, but mostly just collects data. And we put that onto the .com site, and it also went into self-hosted, and people had to opt in to start sending that data to Pendo. But there was a large pushback on even having that third-party code in an open source instance or an open source code base. The users really pushed back on having non-open source code in the application itself.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for reminding us of that history. That happened before my time, but
yeah.
I saw some of the chatter on it before I joined, and certainly the shockwaves of that have been felt internally.
Right, and so some decisions were made to make sure that we are really mindful of what not putting that type of stuff into the code base.
Now, does LaunchDarkly have any capability for consuming data, either that's just directly uploaded to it, via some kind of CSV or something, or through some API whereby we could get the data that we have from Snowplow or something and unplug it in?
Not that I have seen. It's really LaunchDarkly is really mostly just a tool that says, should I display this or should I not, and makes that decision for you, and then sends the data along to their backend based off of an event that you fire to them. So technically, I think you could fire those events, but it's just as easy to send those to Snowplow and do the statistical analysis yourself. And that sort of leads me to the second way that we do this, which is we use an open source tool right now. I can't remember exactly the name of it. Let me see if I can figure out the name. We use an open source Rails tool to make the decision. I think it's called like Scientist or something like that, but I'll find out.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with Scientist, actually.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so and that makes the decision on whether or not to show the different versions of the test based on criteria that you provide to it, and then sends win-loss information to Snowplow. Now, the problem with using that we've found is that you have to instrument the data every time you run a test. So you have to. It's really it's not super simple to set up. You have to create those events and send them in the right way, and you have to create the dashboard to measure the A/B test in Periscope based off of the data that you're sending. And I believe you have to tell the data team to include that those events in the payload that syncs whatever database to our data warehouse.
I see. So a lot of moving parts.
There's a lot of moving parts to getting a test spun up, and it's not as simple as we would like it to be. Especially like our goal is to be running multiple tests a week, and it's really not possible with our current infrastructure. So let me post this in the chat. I got. Some information. I guess we use a few things. We use Flipper, Unleash, and then we use LaunchDarkly on the marketing site. I'll post that in the chat. I guess there was some discussion about using Scientist or Flipper, and we went with Flipper.
Okay, Flipper, I don't know. Yeah.
So, I mean, just in terms of running an A/B test, it does take quite a bit of planning and some coordination with the data team and the engineering folks to make sure that we know what events we're sending, and those get pulled into the data warehouse to do the analysis. And then depending on where you put it, it could take quite some time to run that test.
And why is that?
Well, because a lot of the areas that we do testing on don't get as high of traffic as we would like, I would say. But like, for example, when we run a test on users signing up for the application, we only get a few hundred events, and so we have to run the test for 3 or 4 weeks or so. And a lot of the problem with our current methodology in running this is, okay, there's a couple problems, and I don't want to lay the problems on you, but I'll just sort of lay out the learnings of our A/B testing. One is we don't have user ID in our data collection, so you can't tie tests to broader behavior, right? You can't say like, okay, users who were successful in the test ended up not being successful later on. You can't do that analysis because you don't actually know who was in the test and who wasn't. So you have to be really clear on what your success criteria is in that test. The other thing is that if you don't get your data right before you go live, it took us, I think, like 6 weeks or 8 weeks to run one test because we found out 2 weeks in that the data was it was miscounting one of the, I think it was the control. So it's miscounting the control. Now you have to go back and fix it, and you got to run the test for another 3 weeks. So it took quite some time to run the test. It's not like you can just reconfigure what data you're looking at. And then lastly is that Snowflake, which is the API that we use to collect information, it excludes some folks by default. I think mostly like European and really like GDPR countries, especially if you have like do not track on your in your browser. So like it'll exclude a lot of European folks. It'll exclude people who have you're not tracking their browser, and so you don't get a real sense of like the real traffic. So if you, for example, when we were using LaunchDarkly, we also had Snowflake events, and there was a huge discrepancy in the data. So you have to, that's why I said you have to run the test for quite some time, because a lot of the users that you're seeing are not, it's not the full scope of the user base.
Have you thought about how you want to see your test infrastructure evolve? And
we have, yes. And so
steps are taken that.
So the engineering manager who works on my team and on the telemetry team, his name is Jerome. He's been working on standardizing an A/B test framework inside the product so that we can more easily run and configure these tests.
I just chatted with him earlier today, actually, on another topic.
Yeah, so right now it's not super easy. We're all hoping that it gets much easier into the future, so we don't have to do a lot of the upfront research.
Are there steps that you're taking on your own while the telemetry team is still working on that problem?
It's not just the telemetry team. It's a coordination with all of the growth team to decide on a standardized framework for how we run these experimentations and these tests.
And are you speaking about the Jerome who's part of the telemetry team, or am I?
He is. So he is the engineering manager for acquisition, conversion, and telemetry.
Okay. So are there intermediate steps that you're aware of? I mean, I know some of the things that their telemetry team is working on are around tracking users and so on. We're taking some actual first steps to do that before the telemetry steps solution is in place, so that we can get our own North Star metric data back. But we really haven't talked to him or thought too much about the A/B test side of it. And I'm wondering if you all are taking any steps sort of ahead of what they may be doing.
No, I think that the steps that we're taking are mostly just to instrument individual tests every time we need to run one. So, for example, like Tim Hay just ran a test about prompting users when they commit code but don't have a subsequent pipeline, like trying to get people to adopt this CI framework after they end up committing code for the first time. And he had to instrument that test, and then again had to go back and sort of correct the data once he found out that was wrong. So we're continuing down that path for now, because that's really the best path that we have. I mean, that's the only way to make progress at this point on these tests. So that's been our strategy. But this does, I will say that it has implications, because a lot of the work that we as a growth team are sort of forced to take on is larger changes to the application, because instrumenting smaller tests is really a lot of work. So
yeah.
So you'll notice like most of our work is like big changes to how users are onboarded rather than smaller, more iterative tests.
Mm-hmm. So if we wanted to know more details about how you use Flipper and so on, who should we talk to?
I think Jerome would be a good place to start, since he's been doing a ton of research on how it's used sort of across the different growth teams. And then he may point you to Alex or Nicholas, who are more embedded with using that, or even Jeremy on the growth team, who are more technically familiar with Jeremy Jackson. He's in the U.S. time zone, so it'd probably be like if you're looking for some more technical information, he'd be a great person to talk to.
Okay, great. And you also mentioned Alex.
Yes. He's in the European time zone.
Okay.
His last name Buijs.
Okay. And it sounds like, so how many responses do you like to get before you feel like a test is conclusive?
Well, it doesn't really matter how many responses we get, just that we've reached statistical certainty on that test. So I think, for example, we ran a test on about.gitlab.com for like 4 hours because it very clearly showed that the control was better. So I just wait until we get to certainty and then turn the test off.
Okay, so that could be 4 hours, it could be 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Depends on the traffic and sort of the how wide the spread is and the responses and so on.
Exactly, yeah. So it depends on like where in the application you're testing because of the traffic, and then the difference between control and test.
And you're just talking about like a t-test.
Yeah.
With a p-value. Okay.
And that's what LaunchDarkly measures for you, which is pretty nice. Otherwise, you have to do that on your own.
Okay, this has been super helpful. I really appreciate it. I had sort of thought that maybe we were going to be able to use LaunchDarkly, and I was kind of excited about that. But it sounds like for what we're doing, it's a no-go. So unless we can figure out a way to feed data that we already have into it, and
that's
so
very
that
well
might be possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll dig into that and see, and then we'll meet with Jerome and Jeremy Jackson and so on, and see what we can learn from them as well. This has been super helpful. We'll probably come back to you actually with questions about a specific test we want to run to get your feedback on them, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, please do.
Thank you again. Nick, do you have any further questions? Can't hear you, Nick.
All good from my side. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right. See you in a bit.
Take care.
Bye-bye.